What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to bring you the wide receiver and tight ends starts and sits for week 5 of fantasy football. As always on Thursdays, I go through every wide receiver cornerback matchup. I go through all the wide receivers, the fantasy relevant wide receivers and tight ends in fantasy football, whether you should be starting them, sitting them, flexing them, trading them, whatever the case is, you will find it here. Without further ado, we are going to get right into this. But before I do, make sure if you haven't already done so, go down to the bottom of this video and hit the button that looks like this. Means you like the content, means you like what we're putting out. We definitely appreciate any likes on the video. Comment any of your thoughts down below, and please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. It's totally free for you to do, and it helps us grow tremendously. So without further ado, guys, we're going to get right into this. All right, we're going to start this off right away with Thursday Night Football, the game that is going to be happening tonight. Rams at Seahawks. In this game, you can start Cooper Kupp, obviously. You start DK Metcalf, you start Tyler Lockett, and you can low-end flex Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp finally came back to earth this week, but the usage didn't change. So if any of you guys were worried about Cooper Kupp, I wouldn't be, because his usage was the same last week. He just didn't happen to catch those long bomb plays or get super lucky in that department. So as you guys can see on the screen, 32% of the targets last week, 98% of the routes run, nothing to be concerned of there. 34% target share on the year. Definitely great to see from Cooper Kupp. He is a bona fide wide receiver 1, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. He's clearly Stafford's go-to guy. Robert Woods, on the other hand, I'm officially concerned about, because looking at his usage over the first month of the season, he's a lot closer to Van Jefferson than he is to Cooper Kupp. 88% of the routes, 18% target share is much closer to the 14% target share that Van Jefferson has had. We're seeing them use a lot of, extra guys like Van Jefferson, like Deshaun Jackson, like Tyler Higbee, in place of using a 2 wide receiver funnel like they did in years past with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. It looks like Kupp is the clear alpha here, and Robert Woods is going to be the low-end flex play type that I think he is this week. I think we got to kind of throw in the towel on Robert Woods being an every week starter in fantasy. He's definitely a guy you should start in this game because this matchup is pretty good, but he's not a guy that I'm willing to start each and every week if I have better options. So the wide receiver cornerback matchups in this game are as follows. Cooper Kupp against Ugo Amadi. Again, a great matchup for him. Robert Woods against Sidney Jones. A better matchup for him than he's seen in previous weeks, as I mentioned. And then Van Jefferson on DJ Reed on the outside as well. So moving on to the Seahawks side of things, we have DK Metcalf, of course, seeming to have the safer floor of the 2 Seahawks receivers. We've seen that boomer bust narrative and boomer bust nature creep up with Tyler Lockett in weeks past and what we saw from him last year. In the first 2 weeks of the season, Tyler Lockett was a top 5 wide receiver. In the most recent 2 weeks, weeks 3 and 4, Tyler Lockett has finished wide receiver 71 and 74 on the week, the last 2 games. So you still have to start him because you don't want him going off on your bench. But Tyler Lockett is one of those guys that you have to keep in mind. His production is going to fluctuate week over week. He's not a consistent guy. He hasn't been the past 2 years, and he's probably not going to change now. Given the run-heavy nature of this offense, they can't support Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf getting 10 to 15 targets every single week like we probably want them to. But that is not the case right now. Of course, the usage, you guys can see it on the screen, 33% target share for Metcalf, 25% target share for Tyler Lockett. Kind of echoes the point that I talked about already. The matchups are on the screen as follows. DK Metcalf versus Darius Williams in coverage. Tyler Lockett versus David Long on the outside. And then Jalen Ramsey when he goes to the slot. Jalen Ramsey is not expected to shadow DK Metcalf according to PFF, because Jalen Ramsey has not shadowed any receiver really all season thus far. He hasn't shadowed Mike Evans, nor did he shadow DeAndre Hopkins last week. So I think we're safe on the Metcalf shadow matchup front there. At the tight end position, of course, you start Tyler Higbee as a low-end tight end 1. He always has a chance for a touchdown in this high-powered offense. And sit Gerald Everett. I know it's a revenge game, but I'm not really buying too much into that unless I'm completely desperate at tight end, which you should have better options like Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, somebody like that over Gerald Everett. So moving on to the London game. So 9:30 a.m. kickoff Eastern Standard Time, 6:30 if you're on the West Coast. So make sure if you're on the West Coast, set your lineup ahead of time, maybe wake up a bit early, make sure everything's good to go. But this is the Jets at Falcons game in London. Start Calvin Ridley in this game, start Corey Davis in this game, and flex Jamison Crowder in this game. Calvin Ridley, I already talked about on Tuesday. I think he's a every week starter that is currently averaging 10.5 targets per game. So make sure that you go and acquire him on the cheap. He's an every week wide receiver one still, in my opinion. I know this Falcons offense has gotten off to a slow start, but it's a new system. It's a new scheme. There's some pieces that are new, like Kyle Pitts, no more Julio Jones. It's going to take some time to gel. And I think Ridley is going to bounce back in a big way going forward. This offense on the Jets side of things, this offense showed some life last week. We definitely saw what made Zach Wilson the second overall pick. And I think a big deterrent to why he looked so bad in the first 3 weeks was, one, his offensive line being banged up with Mekhi Becton being out, and two, the schedule that they played, the Patriots, the Broncos, and the Panthers, definitely tough matchups for a rookie QB. Zach Wilson last week, though, looked a lot more comfortable in week 4, and I expect that to continue in another easy matchup against the Atlanta Falcons in this game. Jamison Crowder made his season debut last week with Elijah Moore out with a concussion. We obviously saw Elijah Moore being out. Jamison Crowder took over that number 2 receiver role, ran 74% of the routes, and was heavily involved with a 27% target share. So we'll have to see if Elijah Moore plays in this game. Is Jamison Crowder involved to that same degree? If Elijah Moore plays, I have a lot more hesitancy to start Jamison Crowder or to flex him, low end flex him, whatever you were planning on doing. But if Elijah Moore is out, I think Jamison Crowder is a solid start. And of course, we saw Corey Davis get back on track last week. And I expect, as long as the Zach Wilson can keep this offense functional, I think Corey Davis is going to be an every week top 36 wide receiver. And as you guys can see on the screen, we have the matchups there. A. Williams, I don't even know who that is right now, to be honest. So Jamison Crowder does have a favorable matchup there. Corey Davis going up against Fabian Moreau, also a favorable matchup there. So both of those guys, if Elijah Moore is out, should be in a good position to succeed. At the tight end position, make sure you guys are starting Kyle Pitts. Do not sit Kyle Pitts. I know he's been a little frustrating as of late, but as I talked about on Tuesday in the buy lows video, he's receiving the most valuable targets a tight end can see realistically, running 80% of his team's routes, which is up there with the elite tight ends, with the Wallers, with the Kelseys. And he's also seeing a lot of versatile usage, as I've talked about already. 39 snaps, not in line, basically from either out wide or in the slot. This is a guy that is used all over the formation. I just, in fact, traded for him yesterday, and you guys should be able to see that trade on the screen right now. I traded away Noah Fant and Jamison Crowder for Kyle Pitts because I believe, first 4 weeks of the season, he's a rookie tight end, a new offense, new system, new scheme for everybody involved. I think this is the worst we're going to see of Kyle Pitts thus far this season. I think he's only going to get better as the season goes along, given the fact that he is a rookie and it was a new scheme for the Falcons. So moving from the London game to the 1 p.m. kickoff games, we have the New England Patriots and the Houston Texans. In this game, you can start the two obvious names, in my opinion, Jacoby Myers and Brandon Cooks, clearly the number ones on their respective teams, and you can sit everybody else in this game. In my opinion, these guys are every week starters due to the target share that they're seeing. Their offenses aren't the greatest in the world, but Myers carving out a 26% target share in the Patriots offense, and Cooks with a whopping 37% target share in the Texans offense is definitely worthy of starting every single week. You guys can see on the screen, Brandon Cooks going up against Jalen Mills should be an easy matchup for him. And Jacoby Myers going up against T. Thomas. I don't even know who that is. So again, another easy matchup for him to be able to take advantage of in the slot. At tight end, again, we don't really know what to do with this Patriots tight end core. In my opinion, if you have any of them and you have better options, just start those instead of either Hunter Henry or Jonnu Smith. I think you can low end stream either of these guys if you're desperate, but this is a complete mess. We're seeing Hunter Henry run a lot more routes as the weeks go along, and Jonnu Smith is seeing his role kind of diminish as the weeks go along. So not a guy that I'm really willing to start right now in Jonnu Smith. If I'm going to start one, it's going to be Hunter Henry, but he's like tight end 16 for me in my rankings. So I'm not overly excited about starting him either. So Lions at Vikings. In this game, you could start Justin Jefferson. You can start Adam Thielen, but sit all of the Lions wide receivers. It's not that the Lions wide receivers are useless necessarily, but a different one shows up each week. 1 week it's Quintez Cephas. 1 week it's Khalif Raymond. 1 week it's Amon-Ra St. Brown. So just sit them all because you're never really going to predict which week is which. Unless you're completely desperate, I wouldn't be starting any of these guys. But the Vikings studs, on the other hand, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, they're basically in your lineup every week. And I think desperation flexing KJ Osborne isn't the worst thing in the world in this matchup either. Thielen is kind of proving to be the boomer bust option that I expected coming into the year, which is the reason that I was a little lower on Adam Thielen, because basically this guy needs to score a touchdown just because Justin Jefferson is the number one target here. He gets the valuable volume downfield. in the red zone, things of that nature. But Adam Thielen will be involved in the red zone as well. He just doesn't get a lot of high value targets in between the 20s, doesn't get a lot of deep options or anything like that. So this is a guy that needs to be involved in the red zone to be valuable for fantasy. The matchup for both of these Vikings wide receivers is phenomenal, though. As you guys can see on the screen, Adam Thielen going up against Bobby Price and Justin Jefferson against Amani Oruwariye. This should be a great matchup for both of these guys. And I think if you're playing DFS this week, it's probably a good idea to start to stack Kirk Cousins with both of his receivers, because I think they could have a big game in this one. At the tight end position, of course, you'll be starting TJ Hawkinson, but only start Tyler Conklin if you're desperate. Probably another good buy low candidate is TJ Hawkinson. After 2 great games in weeks 1 and 2, where he saw a boatload of targets, Hawkinson hasn't been a world beater the last 2 weeks. So a lot of people are going to panic a little bit on TJ Hawkinson, think that they had an elite tight end and all of a sudden they have like a middling tight end just like everybody else. So it could be a good spot for you to go and trade for TJ Hawkinson, because I do think he's going to get back on track. I expect him to be a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season. Again, the Vikings are about a middle of the pack defense, so that he should be able to get back on track in this game, and he could be a good buy low if you're in need of a tight end. So moving on to the Eagles at Panthers game. In this game, you're going to be starting Devontae Smith, starting DJ Moore, and sitting Robbie Anderson. The blow-up game from Tyreek Hill may take away from the fact that the Eagles were actually quite good against the pass prior to last week. They were holding Deebo Samuel, Amari Cooper, a number of other great wide receivers to, weak fantasy stat lines. But DJ Moore is an every week starter, and I'm not messing around with Robbie Anderson in this matchup. I know he saw a good amount of targets last week, but like I said, the Eagles pass defense is a little better than Tyreek Hill made it look like last week. Devontae Smith on the other side of things is an every week wide receiver 3, in my opinion. The Eagles are currently the pass heaviest team in neutral game scripts right now, and Smith is a big beneficiary of that. 23% target share for Devontae Smith, 44% of the air yards. He's clearly the dude here. He was a top 10 pick for a reason. As you guys can see on the screen, the matchup for DJ Moore looks to be a mix of Darius Slay and Steven Nelson. Again, DJ Moore is playing so well at this point that I don't give a shit who he's matched up against. He's clearly going to wipe the floor with him, so no concerns there. Devontae Smith on the other side of things does have a matchup against Dante Jackson primarily, but also on Rashawn Melvin. I'd imagine he's going to do most of his damage against Rashawn Melvin, because Dante Jackson is kind of similar body type, similar speed level to a guy like Devontae Smith, might be able to stick with him a little bit. Moving on to the tight ends in this game, though, you obviously will be starting Dallas Goedert. He's only getting about 5 or so targets per game, which isn't exciting if you drafted Dallas Goedert. You were hoping for a little bit more, but in my opinion, he's still a back-end tight end 1, and you should be able to start him each and every week, assuming you don't have better options like Noah Fant or Kyle Pitts or anybody like that, because this is a guy that you should be able to start each and every week, given the fact that he is involved in this offense and they are throwing at a very high clip, and it probably will be again in this game, because I think Carolina is probably favored to win this game by a decent margin. Moving on to the Saints at Washington football team game. Start Terry McLaurin in this game, and that's it, basically. This one's pretty simple. The Saints offense can't support a wide receiver to save their lives. Until Michael Thomas is back, I don't really care who's playing wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. I don't want any piece of it. Dante Harris or Marquez Callaway, I just don't care at this point. Terry McLaurin, on the other hand, though, is an every week starter, every week top 15 wide receiver. As I talked about last week with him and Calvin Ridley, he's a bona fide number 1, because he has a 32% target share as of right now, 46% of the team's air yard, and 45% of the end zone targets for the team, with great downfield usage as well. So he's pretty much getting everything you could ask for out of a number 1 wide receiver is Terry McLaurin. And he does have a tough matchup this week, probably expected to be shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore. But again, we've seen Terry McLaurin beat shadow coverage before. He was able to take advantage of James Bradbury in week 2. I don't expect this to slow him down too much, but it does bump him down a little bit in my rankings. To the tight end position in this game, Logan Thomas is out for a couple weeks, so there's no tight ends that I will be starting in this game. I'm not going to mess around with Ricky Seals-Jones or any of his backups or anything like that. So do not start a tight end in this game. It sounds like Logan Thomas suffered like a grade 2 hamstring pull. He should be out for like 4 or 5 weeks by the sounds of it. So definitely not great news if you have Logan Thomas, which I do in one of our listener leagues as well. To the Titans at Jaguars, the next game that we have on the docket here. AJ Brown is an every week start if he plays, as is Julio Jones, but I'll talk about that in a second. In this game, start Marvin Jones and flex Laviska Shenault. So a lot to unpack here with the Titans. AJ Brown, it sounds like, has a chance to play this week. And as a guy who just traded for AJ Brown, and you guys should see the trade on the screen, let me know in the comment section what you think of it. A lot of people said that I fleeced the guy. I'm hoping that they're cautious with AJ Brown. Basically, it's the Jaguars. You can win this game with just Derrick Henry pretty much. I don't think they need to rush AJ Brown back. They're 2-2. It's not like they're 1-3 or 0-4 or anything like that. AJ Brown practiced on Wednesday in a limited capacity, but Julio Jones did not. So based on that information, I'm expecting that AJ Brown is probably going to suit up to play and Julio Jones is going to be out again. Given the fact that they both had the same injury and AJ Brown's 10 years younger than Julio Jones, that kind of makes sense as well. So this is a situation that you need to monitor if you own either of these guys, because it's going to affect the other if one plays or if one doesn't. But either way, if they both play, I'm starting both of them. If one of them plays, I'm starting that one. This is an easy matchup versus the Jaguars. I'll update the matchups, the wide receiver cornerback matchups on Sunday morning's live stream once I know who's playing in this game and I know who's suiting up, because I don't really feel like throwing them on the screen right now because it's kind of useless without them being projected to play. So Marvin Jones had a down week this last week, but his previous 3 weeks before that had been excellent. He had been commanding targets. He'd been used at a very high level, 23% target share on the year. And now DJ Chark is out for the season by the looks of it, gives him a bump up, keeping him firmly in that top 30 range of wide receivers for me. And he's also a guy that I went out and traded for using Brandon Ayuk. I was able to acquire Marvin Jones and Sony Michel in return. So let me know what you think of that trade in the comments as well. So for me, rest of season, Marvin Jones is pretty much an every week starter. And Laviska Shenault, now with DJ Chark out, is probably a solid flex play. I'm not messing around with Tavon Austin or anything like that, though. As you guys can see on the screen, Marvin Jones set to see Janoris Jenkins in coverage. They've actually been using him as like a shadow guy too. So hopefully they do against Marvin Jones, because I think he can take advantage of him quite easily. And Laviska Shenault should see a lot of Chris Jackson in the slot. There is no tight ends in this game, obviously, but Dan Arnold may be a piece moving forward. He was used pretty heavily by the Jaguars in his opening debut with the team. But moving on to the next game, Dolphins at Buccaneers. In this game, you're going to be starting the 3 Bucs wide receivers, and you can flex Jalen Waddle. Now, as we know, and as I've talked about before, the route participation is the key figure for these Bucs wide receivers to determine who is highest in the pecking order. Chris Godwin running 97% of the routes, Mike Evans running 89%, and he did miss a couple plays a couple weeks ago with an injury that he eventually returned from. But Antonio Brown, again, only up around 58% on the season. But good news for Antonio Brown is that without Gronkowski in the lineup last week, the Buccaneers shifted a lot more towards 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receiver sets. And Antonio Brown ran near 70% of the pass plays, which is definitely a lot better for him, should keep him more involved in the offense. And we saw him do some damage against the Patriots last week and was like a bobbled touchdown away from having a great game. Looks like the Bucs outside wide receivers will be the ones with the tougher matchups this week on the outside versus Xavier Howard and Byron Jones. I'm expecting a big game out of Chris Godwin this week. As you guys can see on the screen, it's expected that Mike Evans sees a lot of Xavier Howard. Antonio Brown sees a lot of Byron Jones. So Justin Coleman in the slot, a guy that is going to be attacked by Tom Brady, basically, because Chris Godwin is going to wipe the floor with that guy. On the other side of things, Jalen Waddle is a great start in this game, in my opinion. We've seen what this Bucs secondary has gone through. They're missing their 3 top starting corners for this game. They still do have Richard Sherman, but Jalen Waddle is a slot receiver. He's going to be matched up against Ross Cockrell in the slot, which is a very favorable matchup for him. He doesn't really have the speed to keep up with a guy like Waddle, and he's going to be a big-time DFS target for me in this game. At the tight end position, another guy that I'm probably going to own in DFS as well is Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki has seen his role increase, running well over 75% of the routes for the Dolphins over the last 3 games. And the Bucs defense is just so easy to pass on, as I mentioned right now. And he's in my top 8 tight ends as a result of that, because I think he's going to have a great game. We've seen Jacoby Brissett definitely favor him in the passing game as well. Cameron Brate, OJ Howard, I'm not really messing around with these guys, but if you need one of them, I'd imagine it's going to be Cameron Brate, because he did run a lot more routes than OJ Howard ran last week. I think it was like 38 of like 49 or something like that. Cameron Brate ran overall to OJ Howard. So that's my thoughts on the tight end position. On to the next game that we have here. It's the Packers at Bengals. In this game, you are going to be starting Devontae Adams, and then you can start Jamar Chase, flex Tyler Boyd, and flex T. Higgins. So on Adams, this is pretty simple. Obviously, you know to start him every week, but he is splitting time in coverage versus Eli Apple and Mike Hilton. Both of those guys he can definitely take advantage of. So just in case you were curious who he's going up against, that is who he's playing against in coverage. On the Bengals front, obviously Higgins is the key here. He determines a lot about this matchup because he's missed the last 2 games with a shoulder sprain or shoulder injury. And he has had about 20 days since he last played due to the fact that they played on Thursday Night Football last week. to basically rehab and get back up to speed. He did practice in a limited capacity yesterday, which was Wednesday, which usually means he's trending towards playing. If he does, he's a top 30 wide receiver for me on the week. If he doesn't, that upgrades Jamar Chase to like a top 15 option for me. And it upgrades Tyler Boyd to like a top 25 option for me. So here are the matchups in case you guys are curious. You can ignore Jair Alexander because it sounds like he's going to be done for a while, maybe even potentially for the entire season. So he's definitely going to be out for this game. So Jamar Chase going up against Eric Stokes primarily in coverage. I'd imagine T. Higgins is going to be going up against Jair Alexander's backup. So again, it could be a good game for T. Higgins if he does indeed suit up. So great news all around for the Cincinnati Bengals. I expect this game to be relatively high scoring. If I'm being honest, I think they can do some damage and they should rely more on the pass in this game, given the fact that Joe Mixon is probably out for this game as well. So to the tight end position, Robert Tonyan has been very disappointing thus far this season, but he is running 74% and 80% of the routes the last 2 games, and he saw 7 targets last week. So in my opinion, he's still a top 15 option. He's still a guy that you can throw into your lineup despite how bad it's been. That's just the nature of the position. There's not many great options out there. So Tonyan is still in play for me. CJ Uzomah, I'm not really chasing the points that he put up last week. If you wanted to throw him into your lineup, I suppose you could do worse. But if T. Higgins is back, I think he's probably a guy you don't want to be starting. To the Broncos at Steelers, the next game that we have here. Cortland Sutton in this game is definitely a start, as is Deontay Johnson. And you can flex Chase Claypool if he plays. Sit Juju Smith-Schuster. Cortland Sutton hasn't necessarily been the guy that we hoped he'd be when Jerry Jeudy has been out. He's only actually had a good game once this season out of 4 games against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which isn't ideal because with Jerry Jeudy coming back in the next couple of weeks, I don't think Cortland Sutton is some slam dunk wide receiver 2 the rest of the season. I think he's more of a boomer bust type of flex play, given the fact that this offense does run the ball quite a bit. We're dealing with, lackluster quarterback play to say the least. So I don't think it's a slam dunk that Cortland Sutton's an every week starter, especially if Teddy Bridgewater misses this game. He's set to split time on the outside versus Cam Sutton and Joe Hayden primarily in this game. He's currently my wide receiver 31 on the week, right behind guys like Odell Beckham Jr., Jacoby Myers, Tyler Boyd, and Corey Davis. So if you were wondering who I would start over Cortland Sutton, I would start all the names that I just listed over Cortland Sutton this week, given the fact that we have an uncertain situation with the quarterback, and Sutton hasn't been all that great since Jeudy has been out. On the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things, Deontay Johnson has seen double-digit targets in every single game that he's played this year, the 3 games that he's played. So he is an auto start, in my opinion. But Claypool is the real question mark. Logged a limited practice yesterday. Hopefully he can go, but if he does, he will replace James Washington on the outside in the matchup chart, as you guys can see, against Kyle Fuller. So overall, I think Deontay Johnson is the only slam dunk play in this game. I think both Chase Claypool and Cortland Sutton are kind of flex plays, depending on their status in this game. At the tight end position, you can start Noah Fant. Season high 10 targets last week. He's currently the tight end 7, I believe, on the season. So he's an every week starter for me at tight end. He's been a big beneficiary of some of the injuries that the Broncos have sustained, KJ Hamler and Jerry Jeudy and things of that nature. So moving from the 1 p.m. games onto the 4 o'clock games, we have the Bears at the Raiders. This game, low-end flex, Allen Robinson, low-end flex, Darnell Mooney, and then desperation play, Hunter Renfrow and Henry Ruggs. So you should have better options, but those last 3 guys, as I talked about, Mooney, Renfrow, and Ruggs, they're all between like wide receiver 40 and 50 in my rankings this week. So I suppose they are usable if you're in a pinch, but I would rather not start these guys if I can help it. I think this is going to be a game dedicated to the run and some of the like short passing and stuff like that. So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of points scored in this game. Allen Robinson, on the other hand, has not been a usable option thus far this season. Allen Robinson has been an unmitigated bust in fantasy this year. He's only posted 1 game inside the top 50 scoring fantasy wide receivers, and it was 49 in week 2. So this has been a guy that has disappointed you 4 out of 4 times that you've played him. And Allen Robinson going up against Trayvon Mullen in coverage, this is not a guy that I think is an auto start. I know you drafted him if you drafted Allen Robinson in the 3rd round or in the early 4th round or something like that, but this is a guy that I am willing to sit if I have better options. If you have Corey Davis, if you have Cortland Sutton, if you have Odell Beckham Jr., I would sit Allen Robinson for all those guys because I don't think it is a slam dunk. I would rather play Jalen Waddle this week than Allen Robinson because I think he's been bad. I think this offense is not the greatest. It's 31st in the NFL currently in pass attempts. And these other tertiary options like Mooney and like Komet and like some of these other guys are actually eating into Allen Robinson's target share. So he is not a slam dunk play for me this week. On the Raiders side of things, again, these are the matchups on the screen. I don't think it's a slam dunk that you play any of these guys either, but if you do play one, it looks like Henry Ruggs has the best matchup against Kindle Vildor on the outside. Brian Edwards, a bit of a tougher matchup against Jalen Johnson. So At the tight end position in this game, you start Darren Waller every week. He never leaves your lineup. Stream Cole Kmet, though, if you're desperate. I think given the fact that the wide receivers have a bit of a tougher matchup in this game and they just haven't been good in general, I think there's a chance that Cole Kmet could have like 6, 7, 8 targets in this game and could be a decent streaming option if you're looking for one. So Browns at Chargers, the next game that we have on the slate. Start the usual suspects in this game: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Odell Beckham Jr. Keenan Allen basically fits into the same mold that I talked about with Stephon Diggs and with Calvin Ridley. His expected fantasy points is much higher than what the real thing is equated to, basically. He's currently the wide receiver 6, Keenan Allen, in expected fantasy points based on his usage, where his targets are coming from and things of that nature. But he's only the wide receiver 17 actually in fantasy points right now. So he's a guy, like I said, with Ridley and with Diggs, I think he's going to bounce back and he's going to be back into that elite wide receiver conversation sooner rather than later. Mike Williams, on the other hand, should be fine after the dud that he put up in week 4. It was a tougher matchup. I think he's going to be, back and better than ever, basically. OBJ, obviously on the other side, with the most frustrating dud that a lot of people probably experienced last week. The guy probably could have went for 6 for 125 and 2 touchdowns and easily was missed for like 4 big plays by Baker Mayfield, and instead dropped a 2 for 27 performance because of Baker's poor play. And it sounds like Baker Mayfield is dealing with a shoulder injury. It's not his throwing shoulder, but he is dealing with an injury of some kind. So definitely something to monitor with Beckham Jr., because Baker Mayfield, while he did miss him a couple times last week, is still his best option at producing for fantasy. On the screen right now, you guys will see the cornerback matchups for the Los Angeles Chargers. Keenan Allen versus Troy Hill, definitely a good matchup for him. Mike Williams, primarily seeing Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams on the outside. Maybe not quite as ideal for Mike Williams, so it could be a Keenan Allen game in this one. On the other side of things, you can see Odell Beckham Jr. going up against Asante Samuel Jr., who's having a pretty good rookie season, so a bit of a tougher matchup for him in that one as well. This game could be a little lower scoring than some people are anticipating. Maybe they slow this one down. But the Chargers are throwing the ball at such a high rate that it's pretty hard to anticipate them being in any low-scoring games at all this season, to be honest. At the tight end position, you can stream Jared Cook in this matchup. He's not a bad option at tight end. He's had 2 solid outings so far out of the 4 games that he's played this year. So I suppose you could do worse. If you were choosing between Jared Cook and Robert Tonyan, I'd probably go with Jared Cook. Jared Cook or the Patriots tight ends, Jared Cook or Tyler Conklin. I'd favor Jared Cook over all those guys, but he's in that tight end 15 range for me in my rankings. To the next game that we have here, it's the Giants at Cowboys. In this game, you can start Amari Cooper, you can start CeeDee Lamb, and you can flex Kenny Golladay. So according to PFF, there's supposed to be a lot of shadow coverage in this game. Cooper is expected to be shadowed by James Bradbury. Lamb is expected to be shadowed by Adoree Jackson. And Trevon Diggs is supposed to shadow Kenny Golladay. So that's not what you're looking for, especially in a game that we want these wide receivers to perform because they've been underperforming as of late, specifically the Cowboys guys. Sterling Shepard has a chance to play in this game. He did miss practice Wednesday, but he is apparently suiting up to a limited capacity today based on what I saw earlier. So not sure how much he's going to factor into this matchup, but if Kenny Golladay is being shadowed by Trevon Diggs and Sterling Shepard is back, he's going to be a smash play in this matchup as a top 40 wide receiver. As I talked about already, it could be a rough game for the pass catchers on the Cowboys side of things. Still starting the Cowboys wide receivers as top 25 options, Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, but this offense, while explosive, is spreading the ball out more than we anticipated. They're using Zeke, they're using Dalton Schultz, they're using Cedric Wilson, more involved than we probably wanted them to be, especially once Michael Gallup went down. I really expected this to be a complete funnel offense between Cooper and between Lamb. That's not really come to fruition thus far. They've kind of underperformed relative to expectations. As you guys can see on the screen, I talked about the wide receiver cornerback matchups. I'm probably not messing around and playing Kadarius Toney as anything less than a desperation play, and only if Sterling Shepard is out. If Sterling Shepard plays, I'm not starting Kadarius Toney at all. I know you guys probably spent some of your fab on him, but he's a guy that is pretty much just a stash option for me if Sterling Shepard plays. And then, as I mentioned, those 2 corners will be shadowing the 2 Cowboys wide receivers. To the tight end position in this game, Dalton Schultz has overtaken Blake Jarwin in the depth chart pretty convincingly by now. 53%, 60%, and now 79% of the routes in recent weeks for Dalton Schultz. His role continues to grow. The last 3 games, he's an every week starter at tight end, in my opinion, right now as a back end tight end 1 in the range of guys like Dallas Goedert, of guys like Noah Fant, guys like that. That's probably the range where I'm looking at Dalton Schultz. Same goes for like Dawson Knox, for example. Those guys are pretty much every week back end tight end 1s going forward for me. To the next game that we have here, the 49ers at Cardinals. In this game, you can start DeAndre Hopkins, you can start Deebo Samuel, and you can low-end flex really anybody else that's in this game. On the Cardinals side of things, Hopkins is an every week stud, every week starter who you should be buying currently if you don't currently own DeAndre Hopkins, because I've already talked about him with Ridley and with Diggs and with Keenan Allen. Hopkins is getting the elite usage like Ridley, like Allen, like Diggs. He's just not quite getting the elite production that we want to see out of Hopkins. But this could be a squeaky wheel gets the grease game for DeAndre Hopkins. And he's going to be a big time, highly owned guy for me in DFS lineups because I think he could pay off big. We know the roles of this Cardinals wide receiver core by now, just to refresh you. DeAndre Hopkins and AJ Green are the two outside guys. They play left side and right side of the field pretty much exclusively. Christian Kirk is the slot guy. Rondale Moore is mixed in. That's basically how these guys work out. Kirk was dealing with basically an impossible matchup last week, which is why he was definitely a sit. And I told you guys to sit him because Jalen Ramsey is the slot corner for the Rams. And he was basically on Jalen Ramsey the whole time. So he's not a bad start if you want to start Christian Kirk this week, if you need him, because he is a big play threat. We've seen him catch a couple long bomb touchdowns, and same goes for AJ Green, 6 targets in every game so far. Could be a guy that you need to throw into your lineup as a desperation flex or something like that. It looks like based on the matchups, AJ Green has the most favorable matchup outside of DeAndre Hopkins in this game. So it could be another game where AJ Green produces. On the other side of things, the 49ers side, unfortunately for Brandon Ayuk owners, we saw his routes dip back down below 70% when they were at 90% in week 3. Again, this actually caused me to trade Brandon Ayuk in my home league, my third trade of the week. I did make 3 trades this week. I was quite active on the trade market. As I talked about already, I traded away Brandon Ayuk for Marvin Jones and Sony Michel because I basically sold somebody on the upside of Brandon Ayuk, which is looking bleaker and bleaker by the week because Deebo Samuel continues to dominate. I don't think George Kittle is going to be as quiet as he's been thus far. And Marvin Jones to me is just a far safer bet for guaranteed touches, guaranteed volume, and guaranteed targets. So I went with him in an upside swing at Sony Michel at running back. So let me know in the comment section what you think about that trade. He's a low-end flex play, in my opinion, Brandon Ayuk, until further notice at best. But he's a guy that I'm not overly excited about starting in my roster right now. Deebo Samuel is expected to see Robert Alford in coverage. Marco Wilson also a good portion of the time as well. Brandon Ayuk should see a good portion of Marco Wilson as well. So those are the matchups on the screen there. At tight end, start George Kittle in this game. And I know George Kittle has been disappointing relative to where you had to draft George Kittle, but Dwayne McFarland, whose utilization and charting I make reference to in all these videos, he wrote this about George Kittle in the utilization report this week. His utilization has been astronomical. Go buy him before the blow-up game inevitably comes and reminds us of his greatness. That's basically what he wrote about George Kittle. The game is coming. Just like for Kyle Pitts, in my opinion, George Kittle and Kyle Pitts will not last as these like middling tight end options like they've produced as thus far. They're going to get back into their elite status, especially George Kittle, who we've seen do it for a couple of years now. If you can go buy him low, if you can go get him for Cordero Patterson and like somebody else, go ahead and do that because he is going to be a guy that probably has an expiring low price tag coming after this week. So moving on to Sunday Night Football, the second last game on the slate that we have for that I have here for you today. Bills at Chiefs in this game. Again, really exciting Sunday Night Football game. I think this one should be an awesome game just from a real life NFL perspective. In this game, you start Tyreek Hill, of course. You start Stephon Diggs, of course, and you can flex Emmanuel Sanders and flex Cole Beasley. The Bills passing attack is high powered enough, as I've talked about already, to support all 3 of these dudes. Stephon Diggs, again, needs to be a top priority trade target for you guys. If you're looking to upgrade at wide receiver, if you can take Tyler Boyd, take Cordero Patterson, and somehow get to Stephon Diggs, and don't laugh in the comment section. I've seen it happen already. So that's basically something that I'm looking to do if I'm looking to acquire an elite wide receiver. As I talked about, the Bills currently rank 3rd in the NFL in neutral situation pass rate. So those numbers for Diggs, those numbers for Sanders, those numbers for Cole Beasley, and those numbers for Dawson Knox seem to be pretty sustainable based on how they're operating their offense. As you guys can see on the screen, these are the matchups for the week. Cole Beasley going up against L'Jarius Sneed, Emmanuel Sanders against Mike Hughes, Stephon Diggs also splitting time versus Mike Hughes and DeAndre Baker. I think this could be, again, a squeaky wheel game for Stephon Diggs. He could finally get his big game of the season because he's been relatively quiet relative to where you drafted him. So Tyreek Hill on the other side of things, pretty simple. He's set to see Teron Johnson in the slot. Could be another big day for Tyreek Hill. Could be another monster performance. And what else would I expect coming from primetime Tyreek Hill? He usually does put those up on Sunday Night Football. At the tight end position, Kelsey's in your lineup, of course, but Dawson Knox has been great so far this year. Of course, as you guys know, if you own Dawson Knox or if you've been starting Dawson Knox, he's in low-end tight end 1 consideration for me the rest of the year, really, because the usage he's seeing is actually quite good. It's not just he's getting lucky catching a couple touchdowns here and there. He's running well over 70% of the routes, which is way more than he was running last year. And he's commanding a 16% target per route run number, which is definitely solid for a tight end. He's running more routes in the last 3 games than Cole Beasley is, which is really insane to me with Dawson Knox, because that's not something we expected coming into the season. He was kind of just a late round dart throw, third tight end in best ball drafts kind of guy, but he's actually showing up to be a pretty solid contributor. So to Monday Night Football, Colts at Ravens. In this game, you can start Hollywood Brown, start Michael Pittman Jr., but don't start Rashad Bateman. So on Rashad Bateman, John Harbaugh basically talked about Rashad Bateman today. He was asked if Rashad Bateman would make his first start this week, and he said, we'll see, basically, which could mean no, or it could just mean they're going to see how he's going to progress throughout the week, monitor his practice reports. But even if he plays, he's not a guy that I can throw into my lineup quite yet. I need to see him get a full route participation and things of that nature before I actually put him in there. Until then, Hollywood Brown should continue to be an every week starter at wide receiver. Set to see Isaiah Rodgers and Kenny Moore splitting time and coverage as the matchup for him. He should be in for a solid day yet again. Could have another chance for a big play in this one. And then on the other side of things, I talked about Michael Pittman already this week, but I was wrong about this dude. He's commanding targets at a high rate. There will be a high rate of annoying plays where Carson Wentz will just miss it, because Carson Wentz is just certified dog shit at quarterback. So he's going to miss Michael Pittman Jr. from time to time, but Michael Pittman Jr.'s receiving usage is the important thing, right? 99% of the routes, 26% target share, 38% of the air yards, 17% of the end zone targets, and 38% of the targets on 3rd and 4th down is definitely something you love to see, really, if you're a Michael Pittman owner. Has a pretty easy matchup in this one as well. So that is basically it, guys. At the tight end position in this game, obviously, you know to start Mark Andrews. I don't need to elaborate on that. So if you guys did enjoy this video, as always, go down to the bottom of the screen, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. It takes you 2 seconds, helps us out tremendously. We're at about 6,900 subscribers right now, hoping to get to 7,000 before week 6 if possible. So make sure we can potentially get that done. Again, as always, if you want access to our weekly rankings, I made reference to them throughout this video. You can go to our website, purchase them outright for $20. You can go to underdogfantasy.com, and using promo code FSE at sign up and first deposit, you can get both of our rankings for free, as well as $10 on top of whatever you deposit on Underdog Fantasy. And you can play some of their pick'em contests, their over-unders. You can do a best ball resurrection lineup where you basically draft a new best ball team that starts in week 6 and plays out for the rest of the season. Now that we know some of the information that we know, that maybe that'll appeal to you as well. And you can use all that using promo code FSE at sign up on Underdog Fantasy, and you can get our rankings for free that way. And of course, you can become a Patreon, patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange to get our rankings as well. So peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.